Outside of the history and biography room, we are set up with our book TV set where we've been all day, and we're pleased to be joined now by David Treuer. Here is one of his only nonfiction book, Rez Life. Mr. Treuer, what does it mean to be from the Rez?
It's a great question. And it was a question even though I'm from a reservation and I grew up on a reservation and I've moved back to that reservation through various long periods of my life. I didn't have an answer to that. Reservations are so varied, so complex, I think so crucial both to the Indians from them and to the rest of the country. I didn't have a good answer, and that's sort of, in a sense, why I wrote the book.
You used the word Indian, not Native American.
Yeah, this is only me, and I'm only talking for myself, but to me, American Indian, Native American Indian, I use all three interchangeably, just to keep things spicy. Other people care a great deal, but I don't.
Does it make you more authentic?
Does what?
Being from the reservation.
Well, that's one of the things I explore in the book, but there's this perception that unless if you're native but you're not from a reservation, or if you're native from a reservation but didn't grow up really, really hard in poverty and with trauma and drug abuse, then you're not somehow authentically native. And that's one of the things I argue against in the book. I try to show that American Indian life, reservation life, is many things. It might be hard, but it's not just that. That reservation lives aren't simply lives of trauma, reservations aren't simply basins of suffering, that there's all sorts of amazing things at work and at play, politics and language and culture and history, and those things need to be noted and remembered. Most books and most conversations about Rez Life focus on what they think of as the tragedy of our existence. And I have to tell you that, we don't live on our reservations because they suck. We live on them because we love them, we care about them. They're important places, they're vibrant, interesting places in ways that even other Native people don't really understand. And so this book is really meant to explore what reservations mean for Native people and what they mean for the country of America.
From your book, Rez Life, Indian land makes up 2.3% of the land in the U.S. We number slightly over 2 million, up significantly from not quite 240,000 in 1900. First of all, why 240,000 only in 1900?
The turn of the century, basically after the massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890-91, that period, which happened on the plains, and it happened to the Lakota, but writ large, the turn of the century was the low point for tribes across the country. Our numbers were down. Our traditional forms of leadership had in many ways been compromised or completely destroyed. Culture was under assault through boarding schools and forced assimilation. We had no economic systems in place to replace our tribal way of living. It was the low point. It was like the worst point of our history, I think. Since 1900, or since 1890 to 1900, we have been climbing out of the hole of history. Our numbers have been increasing. Our power, we've been consolidating our power. We've been making our own government. We've been revitalizing our culture and our languages. And we're on the rise, I have to say. And this is nowhere more keenly felt than in an issue like, say, the issue of mascots in the Washington Redskins. The team has enjoyed that racial slur in peace for a long time, but now we're powerful enough, our voices are loud enough, we are savvy enough and smart enough, and that name, the days are numbered for the Washington Redskins. And that's because we continue to exist, and we're growing, and we're getting stronger, which runs counter to the narrative of us as disappeared and gone and all of that, which is also what Rez Life is written against.
Now, you're primarily a novelist.
Yeah, I am.
What made you write this?
I never wanted to write nonfiction. I had no ambition to write nonfiction. But after the school shooting on Red Lake Reservation in 2005, I was sickened by the news coverage of that shooting, which persisted in portraying Indian lives as tragic, as necessarily tragic, as sort of inherently tragic. And the school shooting really brought that home, and it brought sort of the story of the tragic Indian it made it sort of broadly national and very timely. And I went to Morgan Enterkin at Grove Press and I said, I'm sick of that story. I'm sick of that way of telling the story of Indian lives. And he said, so am I. He said, let's do a book. And I was really, really grateful to him and his vision. And I tried to write something that got beyond tragedy. So I had to do that in nonfiction. It was sort of, but it was really, the shooting at Red Lake was very personally felt by me. I used to work in that high school, and I've got family and friends from that reservation. It's just up the road from mine. And I wanted our lives to matter more than simply examples of lives gone wrong.
David Treuer, what's your heritage? Where'd you grow up?
Well, I grew up at Leech Lake Reservation. My mother is Ojibwe from Leech Lake. My father's Jewish, and he's from Austria, and he's a Holocaust survivor. And he fled Austria at age 12, largely on his own, and made it to the States, where he was reunited with his parents. But the rest of his family, except for a few cousins and an aunt and an uncle, all were murdered in Austria by the regime. So I suppose there's a lot of blood on both sides of my family fence.
How did your parents meet?
My father is a man of many lives, and he did many, many things in many places before he finally moved to just off the reservation and taught high school on the reservation in Cass Lake, Minnesota. And he told me just recently that he'd been around for maybe 45, 50 years. It was only when he moved to Leech Lake that he finally felt like he had a home. He's rejected in Austria, rejected in American society, rejected everywhere he went. And the reservation, he said he finally felt accepted and that people understood him as a refugee, as a Holocaust survivor. And so he set up shop, raised his first 3 children there. He and his wife separated, kids grew up, he met my mother. They were working on the same healthcare program on the reservation. They were co-workers, essentially. And fell in love and had the troublesome children they have now, my older brother, myself, and my younger brother and sister.
Here is the cover of the book. You talk about that life is not all bad on a reservation or for American Indians, but then you include this picture.
My cousin Jesse. Yeah.
Who is this?
This is my cousin Jesse. He's my first cousin. He's my Uncle Sonny's son. And he's been in prison for a while with a number of charges. He's going to be getting out very soon. And our lives may not be, I may argue that our lives aren't tragic, but they're hard for some of us. My cousin Jesse, we might be first cousins. We grew up very close to one another, but he's had it much harder than I've had it. And so even in one family, you have a range of experiences. But Jesse, I think, would be the first person to say that his life isn't a tragedy, and he's getting out of prison soon, and he plans to make a fresh start. And I'm really hopeful, and I'm really proud of him.
Have Indian casinos been good for reservations in your view?
Well, have corporations been good for America? Yes and no, right? Casinos are good and bad. Multinational corporations are good and bad. They provide tax revenue and jobs and income, and they help, right? Casinos provide revenue and income and jobs and infrastructure because reservations don't collect taxes from their citizens. So we need to build roads and hospitals and housing for the elderly and schools, et cetera, et cetera. We use casinos to do that. Do they contribute to some unhealthy lifestyles? Absolutely. Do they encourage gambling and drinking and smoking? Sure. Definitely. So, like any big business, they are very complicated. Not all good, not all bad, but they've certainly changed the face of reservation life on many, but not all, reservations, without a doubt.
How much time do you spend away from your home base now at University of Southern California? How much time do you spend at Leech Lake?
It's kind of lately been about I can't even count. I'm home about 3.5 to 4 months a year, and I'm in Los Angeles about 8 months a year. I love my job. I love teaching. I love my students, and USC is a great place to teach, but man, I get homesick. I get so homesick. I love being home at Leech Lake.